Hey guys, Odin from Overwatch Champions here, and you're watching part 2 of our hero guide for Reinhardt. If you haven't already seen part 1, you can check that out right here. In last week's episode, we touched on the abilities, what they do, and some tips and tricks on how to execute with your team and communicate with them. But in this week's episode, we're just going to cover a few of the common questions asked about Reinhardt, so this will be a pretty brief and to the point video. First off, before we get into the meat of it, I just wanted to quickly address a couple mistakes in my previous video. User Joe Collins pointed out that Reinhardt's charge does an additional 50 damage that I did not mention when you contact an enemy player, on top of the 300 on impact. The important caveat about this that I forgot to mention is that players who don't get hit by the pin, but do get hit by the charge, will still take the 50 damage, as well as a significant knockback. Additionally, the shield recharge delay is present whether the shield is destroyed or not, but it's still recommended that you don't allow it to be destroyed, as not having it to block something important like an enemy ult can be pretty devastating. So now that we have that out of the way, let's quickly talk about a few questions that we received. User Cody Davies TV asked, I'd be interested in seeing more stuff about direct character matchups as well. For example, a lot of the lower ranked Reinhardts will often find their shields pulverized in a second by Bastion and hover around indecisively. Well, to expand on this a bit, we'll just quickly take a look at a clip from the last episode. In here, just before I cut the clip, I'm actually communicating with my team, letting them know that we need to minimize the amount of time that we spend in the choke point, and use the speed boost as soon as I call that I'm going in, so that we can spread out and cover as much ground as we can. In situations where your team's Reinhardt seems unsure of where to go or what to do, the two options are asking him to switch if they're not really comfortable playing him, or explaining the importance of getting out of those choke points quickly. Bastion and Torbjorn specifically, as well as Symmetra and Junkrat to some extent, rely on putting a lot of damage into a small area, and in all cases except for Junkrat, they have almost no ability to speak of, and they can be countered by simply spreading out or rushing them. Getting to know the maps and evolving your strategy to include bursting through a choke point and spreading out to take the high ground or flank the defenders is a major component of improving as a player and as a Reinhardt. If we're talking about specific matchups, Reinhardt is basically a skill matchup versus most heroes. There are a few that are simply bad for him, and that includes Tracer, Reaper, Roadhog, and Pharah, who can reliably take him down in a 1v1 situation. But the important thing to note here is that as a Reinhardt player, you should ideally never be in a situation where you're in a straight 1v1, unless it's come down to the last few survivors of a fight. If you get caught somehow, using Rocket Charge to escape the fight is one way to deal with them, and communicating with your team that you're having issues with a Reaper or Tracer and that you need them to target those heroes first is also a viable solution to this problem. I can't stress how important it is that you do not use Earthshatter just to deal with a 1v1 situation. It can be very enticing to do so, but it's a huge waste of an ultimate, especially one that takes as long as Reinhardt's to charge, and this is something I see people do even in the 60s. You may want to use it to catch a second hero, but just be sure to think twice before you drop the hammer on two split targets where you might miss one. In addition, when it comes to using his ult, just remember that Reinhardt's shield can completely block it, as well as Winston's bubble and Zarya's shield. You can actually use this knowledge to your advantage as well, since you can block support ultimates like Sound Barrier. It's difficult to do in practice, but getting used to quickly reacting with your shield can really improve your ability to play Reinhardt. Just knowing when to raise your shield and block damage for your teammates can really change the tide of a fight. Well, that's it for part 2 of this hero episode, guys. Again, we just wanted to keep this short to touch on some things we missed in the last episode, but thank you for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe and hit that like button if you enjoyed the video, and you can find our previous episode and part 1 of this guide right here. I hope this helps so that you guys can get out there and be the hammer.